In the jungles of Vietnam, where sunlight rarely pierced the canopy, people said tanks couldn't fight here. On the first day, the 11th Armored Cavalry Division brought the M48 Patton into the jungle. Sergeant Hendricks, a maintenance NCO, stood knee-deep in the mud, watching the tracks sink lower with each turn. He simply muttered, "They won't last 10 days. People said tanks would fail here, and they were right." On maps back in the Pentagon, the jungle was nothing more than a green blur. No one understood that every kilometer could swallow an entire armored battalion. They drew routes, made calculations, and believed their steel machines would crush any obstacle. But the Vietnamese jungle was a living battlefield, hostile to every piece of machinery. All design assumptions based on hard ground broke apart here. The soil beneath their feet was a mix of mud, rainwater, and rotting leaves. In some places, the ground sank over a meter deep, turning into thick sludge that clung to every wheel and track. Humidity averaged around 80% year-round, with rain falling more than 200 days each year. Exposed roots and fallen trunks blocked movement. Moisture corroded cables and electrical systems within days. Daytime temperatures reached 40 degrees. Nights were nearly saturated with moisture. The constant hot-wet cycle made metal expand, crack its paint, and open paths for rust. Within the first 90 days, nearly one-third of all vehicles broke down before they ever met the enemy. The M48 Patton, pride of the U.S. Army, entered the war like a giant, over 50 tons, a 90mm gun, and a Continental engine pushing 810 horsepower. It was born for dry terrain, not tropical swamps. People said it could crush a village flat, but in the tropical mud, those numbers turned against it. The M113, with its Detroit diesel 6V53 engine, rated at about 212 horsepower, an Allison TX100 automatic transmission, and ground pressure of just 5 to 6 psi spread its weight evenly. The 50-ton Patton did not. Its high ground pressure made it a prisoner of the mud. Once soil moisture hit, 30% rolling resistance, and then engine heat no longer rose by distance, they rose by time. The longer the engines ran, the closer they came to failure. After just a week, the Pattons began to surrender to the jungle. Tracks locked in the muck engines overheated, and paint flaked off as corrosion spread through the hulls. In a report from the 11th Armored Cavalry Division, of 12 Pattons deployed at Long Con, only 3 were still operational after 10 days. One officer wrote, "Engine failure rates increase with every mile. Maintenance cost per kilometer exceeds standard." No one thought he was exaggerating. It was fact recorded in sweat oil smoke and the sight of machines melting into the mud. A French military advisor who had once watched his own army lose on this same soil stood watching the Pattons sink. He smirked and said dryly, "The jungle shortens both reliability and lifespan of equipment." For the Americans, it was a warning. For the French, a memory they had lost here to the same unforgiving land. The Americans believed technology could conquer nature, but the standardized designs built for paved terrain failed in the tropical mire. On the operations map, the jungle was just a patch of green. On the ground, it was alive, silent, patient, and merciless. One by one, the machines disappeared, leaving only the muffled growl of dying engines in the mud. Amid all those failures, a spark of hope appeared. It came from a modest vehicle nearly dismissed at first, the M113. Built from 5083 aluminum, weighing barely a quarter of a Patton, it wasn't loud or intimidating, yet it had something the jungle respected: agility. Its low ground pressure let it glide over mud and flooded paddies where Pattons drowned. Quieter, lighter, and more maneuverable, it could weave through thick undergrowth. In flooded rice fields, American troops called it the armored boat. Instead of trying to conquer nature, they learned to survive within it. This was no longer a battle between man and jungle. It was a battle between weight and survival. Biên Hòa, base, 1966. Under flickering fluorescent lights in 40-degree heat and suffocating humidity, 24-year-old mechanic Sergeant Jack Miller stood before an M113 whose belly had been torn open by shell fragments. Wiping the sweat from his face, he muttered, "If we keep following the manual, everyone inside that thing's gonna die." Behind him, Second Lieutenant Donald Reeves, a young technical officer from Detroit, replied curtly,
"If you weld that unapproved steel plate, I'm not signing the maintenance report."
Miller looked him straight in the eye, his voice dry. "Then you'd better be ready to sign a death report tomorrow." Reeves went silent for a few seconds, then walked away. That night, Miller drilled the first ventilation holes into the roof of the vehicle. The next morning, that M113 was the only one in the platoon that didn't break down on the road. An officer passing by frowned. Who authorized this? Miller shrugged. No one. But if I'd waited for permission, I'd be zipping up body bags right now. Reeves said nothing. In that day's maintenance log, he simply wrote, "Effective temporarily approved." They worked through the night, cutting armor from damaged tanks, drilling each weld by hand. There in the mud of Vietnam, the Americans did what the jungle never expected. They turned a humble troop carrier into a mechanical beast. The M113, once dismissed as nothing more than an armored taxi meant to deliver troops to the battlefield. Not fight in it became the foundation for something new. Under the same flickering lights and choking heat, technical crews worked non-stop. They didn't wait for blueprints from Washington or new designs from Detroit. They used whatever they had, creating the ACAV, the Armored Cavalry Assault Vehicle, a living proof of the American can-do spirit. These fixes existed in no manual. They were written in blood and field experience ACAV turret. The original gun shield was removed and replaced with a makeshift steel turret, welded from salvaged armor. A tall U-shaped shield protected the gunner, mounting a central M2 .50 caliber with twin M60s on each side. The result? 360-degree firepower, effective close-range suppression, and cover for the infantry riding alongside. Belly plating. The thin aluminum hull couldn't withstand mines. Mechanics cut armor plates from wrecked tanks and welded an extra layer beneath the floor to absorb the blast. Mine protection seating. The crew originally sat low directly above the floor, fatal against mine shocks. They raised the seats a few inches, letting blast waves pass through the hull before reaching the body. Cooling and ventilation fix. Inside, the sealed aluminum hull temperatures exceeded 60 degrees Celsius. Their solution drill vent holes install auxiliary fans and accept the risk of shrapnel intrusion, a trade-off, to keep both the engine and crew alive in the tropical heat. Adding turrets and armor changed the vehicle's weight and balance. Maintenance teams had to retest buoyancy, deploying trim vanes, boosting bilge pumps, and redistributing cargo to prevent nose-down sinking. Many units welded side rails to strap sandbags for extra spall protection. They re-engineered ammo racks and added anti-jam devices to the M2, keeping a steady rate of fire. Finally, they painted over the aluminum hull with patches of leaf-pattern camouflage. The M113 had transformed into the ACAV, a war machine forged in Vietnam's mud, a symbol of field ingenuity and the relentless practicality of American soldiers. The innovations at Biên Hòa were no coincidence. They were a tactical rebellion led by young officers, lieutenants, and captains who didn't wait for orders from the Pentagon but rewrote the rules right there on the battlefield. They saw the M48 patent fail and understood that only the M113 could survive the tropical jungle. From that came the birth of the ACAV Doctrine, the foundation of what would later become the Jungle Mechanized Doctrine. Its message was simple. Victory didn't belong to those who followed the old rules. It belonged to those who dared to change them under fire. Battle of Ap Bao Bang Bien Duong Province. November 1965. Dawn, thick fog, the humidity so high, it cut visibility down to a few dozen meters. Along Highway 13, about 3,000 Viet Cong troops lay in ambush trenches, anti-tank mines, and gun pits, their goal, to cut the American convoy in half. The U.S. column moved forward 113 mud-painted M113s advancing through early monsoon rain. The moment the lead vehicle touched the swampy ground, a mine detonated. A column of smoke shot up dozens of meters high. Some vehicles caught fire, but the formation didn't stop. They pushed straight through the minefield, maintaining speed to avoid being pinned under concentrated fire. A gunner on the Charlie 2 called over the radio. Lead vehicle hit a mine. The commander replied short and sharp. Keep the throttle steady. You make it past, you live. The whole formation kept moving through a storm of shrapnel and mud. 50 cal fire from the M2 Browning and bursts from M60s on both flanks formed a curtain of suppression across the field. Headlights cut through the mist, scanning for targets. Through smoke and mud, Charlie 2 swung its headlights toward a Viet Cong position. Gunner Joe Danner emptied his belt, tossed a smoke grenade out, and shouted, Shift position, keep it rolling. The vehicles crawled through the haze, the sound of grinding tracks blending with the rain of bullets. The formation held its standard structure, 3 vehicles per section. 1 command vehicle, 2 on the flanks. They kept 25 to 50 meters apart to avoid hitting the same mine. One rule only, keep moving even if you're hit. Maintain RPM. Push past the kill zone. The following vehicles shielded and pulled out the wounded from the damaged ones. Fire rolls were clear. The M2 .50 cal targeted bunkers and hard points. The M60s swept the lower ground. When forced to pull back, crews popped smoke grenades, changed direction, and stayed in motion. The Battle of Ap Bao Bong ended after roughly an hour. The Viet Cong withdrew, leaving behind hundreds of casualties. It was the first proof that a light armored formation could fight and survive in the tropical jungle. The M113 was no longer just a troop carrier, it had become a spearhead. After the battle, reports showed only 8% of M113s were lost, less than half the expected rate. That dry number was enough to turn an armored taxi into an offensive weapon. Before ACAV modifications, each mechanized company typically lost 3 to 4 vehicles after every long operation. A month after the widespread addition of improvised belly armor, raised seats, and field cooling systems, losses dropped by nearly half. Small numbers, but enough to shift an entire doctrine. The commander sighed. We just kept running. After Ap Bao Bong mechanization spread across the entire theater, M113 convoys rolled day and night. The night convoys, columns of vehicles moving through the jungle, headlights forming glowing chains through rain and mud, became a familiar image of the American mechanized war in the South. At its peak, over 4,000 vehicles and 100,000 troops formed a logistical web that moved more than 1 million tons of ammunition and fuel to the front each year. A standard combat structure emerged. Armored vehicles led the way. Infantry followed close behind. Artillery and helicopters provided distant cover. The roar of engines, the grinding of tracks, the thunder of explosions all merged into one sound, the sound of a new kind of war. It marked the turning point from traditional infantry warfare to full mechanized combat, where technology had to learn to live with the jungle, not try to dominate it. After the battles in Binh Duong and Tay Ninh, documents recovered from Viet Cong, units noted the appearance of a new light armored vehicle capable of high mobility in swampy terrain. The M113 was described as amphibious, able to keep moving even after hitting an anti-tank mine, and to continue its assault even when damaged or on fire. Those traits earned it the nickname Iron Devil, a machine that refused to die. The M113's psychological impact came not only from its firepower, but from its constant presence. Its tracks kept turning through smoke and flames, its engine echoing through the night, giving the impression that the enemy could appear anywhere, anytime. A report from a local commander read, "They're not faster, but they're everywhere in the same night." Traditional ambush tactics quickly lost their effectiveness. Mines and punji pits could slow the vehicles, but rarely destroyed them. To stop them, Viet Cong fighters had to close the distance, aiming B-40 or B-41 rockets at the thinner armor on the sides or roof. But the closer they got, the more likely they were to be caught in the sweeping fire of the .50 caliber and M60s mounted high above the ground. Faced with this mobility advantage, ambush teams were forced to constantly relocate. In a field notebook recovered in Tay Ninh, a line scrawled in pencil read, "Don't fire from far. Wait till it's close. But if it's close, you take a 50 round." A young fighter asked. "So,
what do we do, sir?"
The commander stayed silent for a long time before replying. "Pray the mine goes off at the right spot." The M113 could turn quickly in tight trails, cross streams, and push through low jungle. That made ambush preparation time-consuming and increased the risk of being discovered before contact. Some guerrilla units resorted to heavy minefields, stacking 105 mm or 105 mm artillery shells deep underground, or launching point-blank assaults to negate the Browning .50's high-angle advantage. But those methods demanded manpower supplies and coordination and increased the risk of exposing their positions. On the other side of the line, at a field maintenance post near Tay Ninh, an American technician and his commanding officer argued in the rain.
You want a permit or you want your men alive? Both.
but right now, I'll take alive.
After that brief argument, the 1st M113 in their platoon received improvised side armor made from recycled steel. No one reported it up the chain. In later reports, the Viet Cong noted that the M113 had become one of the key factors exposing the limits of traditional ambush warfare. The Iron Devil wasn't fast, wasn't stealthy, but its endurance and the sound of its tracks were a warning. An attack could come at any moment. From the outside, the M113 looked like a reliable armored vehicle, but inside it was a harsh, unforgiving place. The compartment was completely sealed during combat. Heat from the engine and gunpowder built up inside, pushing interior temperatures to 55 to 60 degrees in the dry season. The air was thick with oil fumes, the smell of burnt propellant, and the constant vibration of the engine, enough to make breathing difficult. When the crew went into full button-up, the procedure used to protect against RPG attacks, visibility dropped to almost zero. All awareness depended on the commander's voice over the intercom. In that closed space, any metallic clang could be mistaken for incoming enemy fire. The 5083 aluminum armor made the M113 light and amphibious, but carried a deadly flaw. When hit by a B-40 rocket or armor-piercing round, the metal would melt and fragment into razor-sharp aluminum spall, causing devastating injuries inside the cabin. Some underbelly explosions produced enough shockwave to blow the floor upward, killing the crew instantly from spinal trauma. In Jong Thap, 1968, the lead M113 in a column hit an anti-tank mine. Sergeant Ray Coleman. Orange. Elis Moiner 21. The driver had once joked with his crew, "If this thing blows, at least I'm closest to the exit." When the mine detonated, the floor burst open. He was thrown clear, severely burned, the only one to survive. The vehicle caught fire within a minute. The warped metal jammed every hatch. From that day on, the nickname Widowmaker spread among the armored ranks. A maintenance engineer wrote in his report, "The aluminum melts faster than a man can open the hatch." That single cold sentence captured all the fear inside the sealed hull. To reduce casualties, crews were instructed to follow simple precautions. Apply heat-resistant grease to the hatch pins, raise the seats a few inches above the floor, and keep the hatches closed when close combat threats increased. These small adjustments saved lives, but created a cruel paradox. The safer they were, the more isolated they became from the world outside. After the war, the trauma lingered. Many veterans said that the sound of an engine roaring in a confined space made them feel trapped again, as if they were back inside that burning, shaking compartment. Even the hum of a generator was enough to bring the battlefield rushing back. The M113 was both a lifeline and a killer. Post-war reports noted that crew casualties in M113s were higher than those of infantrymen moving on foot in certain types of ambushes. It was the price paid for mobility and for the power to move through the jungle. After 1975, when the Vietnam War ended, many M113s were left scattered across the battlefields. Some were recovered by the People's Army of Vietnam and repurposed for training operating in the very same areas where they had once fought. Others too damaged to move were left behind in Cu Chi and Tai Ninh as research models and display relics. Even after leaving Vietnam, the M113 continued to serve in armies around the world. By 1991, it reappeared in the Gulf War, operating across scorching deserts, an environment completely opposite to the humid jungles of Southeast Asia. From the hard-earned lessons of Vietnam, the U.S. military developed the concept of adaptive mechanization. Vehicles had to provide better protection against mines, dissipate heat more efficiently, be easy to maintain in the field, and remain mobile across varied terrain. This mindset led directly to the creation of next-generation platforms such as the Stryker and MRAP, optimized for the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. New designs, V-shaped hulls. For mine-resistant suspended blast-absorbing seats, high-capacity cooling systems, and 360-degree observation cameras all carried the fingerprints of Vietnam's experience. Their purpose to reduce secondary fragmentation inside the cabin, lessen casualties from underbelly blasts, and allow crews to keep fighting without opening the hatches under close-range fire. This evolution showed that modern warfare was no longer defined solely by firepower and armor thickness, but by the ability to adapt balancing man, machine, and environment. It marked a major shift in American mechanized doctrine in the late 20th century. In Vietnam, field mechanics and combat engineers constantly rebuilt, modified, and experimented right on the front lines, turning every breakdown into a technical lesson. From those improvised fixes came a new philosophy. A vehicle wasn't just manufactured, it was completed through combat. For that reason, the M113 is remembered not merely as an armored vehicle, but as an evolutionary platform. From the humid jungles of Vietnam to the deserts of the Middle East, it embodied the philosophy of flexible mechanization to survive, adapt, and keep moving forward. Amid the rusting shells at Cu Chi, an American veteran who once served aboard an M113 stood quietly staring at the moss-covered hull. He spoke softly, almost to himself. It wasn't perfect, but it learned faster than we did. The jungles of Vietnam never belonged to the heaviest machines, they belonged to those that could change, and to the men who dared to fix them before they were told to.